Glenn Libet is an incredibly socially awkward idiot who thought being a doctor meant saving lives and not getting seduced by every monster girl with a heartbeat. But here he is, the only guy in town who can heal these ladies, and let's just say their medical checkups get freaky real fast. This anime is saucy, and I'm going to be censoring a lot of things. Glenn is not lucky, but Glenn has luck. Bro didn't need a sword or a shiny armor to bond with the finest maidens, but ladies line up at his feet, literally begging for his vanilla milkshake and to be massaged by his magical staff. I'm not going to tell you why, you're just going to find out story time. There was once a war between humans and monsters, probably because humans felt inferior to these monsters or they wanted full power over them. The war ended when everyone got tired. His first patient is a cowgirl, and wow, she is stacked like a tower of watermelons. This blunt goat gets right to work checking those watermelons like they hold the secrets of the universe. This checkup is sending her straight into bliss. He pokes prods and then checks. Her ears, turns out she's with child. Her husband, a full-blown bull with horns, was happy. He's about to be a daddy. Glenn's assistant Safin slithers in holding flowers to congratulate the happy couple. But there's a problem. She is in a mood, and it's not the good kind. She hates that Glenn was alone in a room with another woman, especially when he has to lay hands on them, all in the name of a medical examination. She also wants him to call her by a cute nickname from their school days, but that's not happening. A letter arrives from Dr. Dully summoning Glenn and Safin for a checkup session. They head to the arena the next day where they're greeted by Talia, a centaur princess and a fighter. She struts in all royal and confident. The less farm animal in a human body gets to work straight up, and this time his first patient is a cat girl who wants to pounce on him so badly that she jumps on him immediately. But Safin is having none of it with one quick tail whip. The cat girl is off Glenn and sent flying. Then Talia steps up for her checkup. She starts undressing, talking about how she doesn't want a rigid man, but someone as soft and gentle as Glenn. This fool is too dense to realize she's flirting. Saying once again is not having it. She jumps into the conversation before this horse girl can seduce the world's dumbest doctor. Later that night, Glenn is tossing and turning unable to sleep. Talia's attendants, Kay and Lorna, had spilled some concerning tea. These two centaur ladies are loaded with watermelons, so majestic. I won't mind having one of them. They are worried because Talia has been losing fights lately, even though she trains hard and has talent. Glenn, with his 2 remaining brain cells, starts thinking about possible reasons safe and shows up and offers to bring him alcohol to help him relax. When she returns, she hands him a single glass, while she herself chugs a jug, like she's the drunken kung fu master. This snake lady is built differently. Tipsy and feeling bold, she wraps Glenn up in her tail. It looks like she's about to drain the humanity out of him, but instead she just threatens him. Apparently Dr. Cully would never forgive her if she loved this goat into oblivion the next day. Talia loses another fight. That night while she's training, she gets ambushed, not by an enemy, but by Glenn and some helpers who tie her down for a hoof treatment. She resists, but there is no escape. Once again, Glenn, the vet gets to work, filing and fixing her hooves, while she cries about loud. Safin sees what's happening and isn't about to let Talia moan her way into Glenn's pants. Without hesitation, she wraps her tail around the horse girl and shoves the tail end into her mouth. The next day, Talia enters her match and wins effortlessly. She cheers like a kid who just got a lifetime supply of candy, turns out. All she needed was some proper hoof care who knew a horse girl needed functioning feet to fight. Safin remembers the time she was dragged to Glenn's house like an unwanted package during the war between monsters and humans. Once the war ended, she was sent home, and she left in a carriage. Glenn turned into a weeping mess, bawling like a baby who dropped his ice cream back in the present. Safin realizes they have run out of purified water, but before she can do anything about it, a knock interrupts her. She opens the door, and there stands Glenn asking about her sunblock ointment. Later, the two sit in a boat floating down the waterways. Glenn starts blabbering about the importance of sunblock, making safe, and thank him. Meanwhile, San is just excited to be outside with him. The person paddling their boat ditches them, and Glenn reminds saying that they are here for purified water, not a shopping spree. Suddenly, a goofy-looking merman pops out of the water and greets them. Safin, being Safin, immediately gets excited and tells the merman to take them to the gift shop. Glenn, as a fun sponge that he is, immediately shuts that down and tells the merman to take them to the purified water shop instead. After finally getting water, San once again tries to head to the gift shop. Glenn looks at her like she just suggested setting their money on fire and tells her they'll waste cash at the gift shop. SA, and gets excited over a single glass. But then she says the best gift is following Glenn on his journey. This makes Glenn blush because even he can't believe she actually thinks he's worth following. A little mermaid suddenly calls them, making safe and practically explode with excitement. She insists they stop and listen to Little Mermaid. Lula introduces herself and says she sings for 3 Coopers. As Safin and Lula chat, Glenn completely zones out. This absolute genius is too busy thinking about nothing until Safin wakes him up by licking his face. Lula convinces them that listening to her song will make their relationship lovely. Safin tries to pay, but Glenn says he'll handle it. Lula starts singing beautifully until she starts coughing like a grandpa without his inhaler. She tries to continue for free, but Glenn suddenly, remembering he's supposed to be a doctor, says they need to find out what's wrong. He asks the weird-looking merman to take them somewhere quiet for examination. Lula broke as a joke, says she can't afford an exam. Glenn assures her it's free. He checks her mouth, finds some inflammation, and then he asks her to open her chest. Lula, rightfully horrified, refuses. Sane quickly steps in before Glenn can make things even worse and helps him rephrase. Glenn then checks Lula's gills and, like a professional, sticks his wet fingers inside. Lula makes some weirdly happy noises, making Glenn freeze like a deer in headlights. Finally, he pulls his hand out and finds something sticky. Before Glenn can explain what's wrong, chaos erupts as a boy falls into the river. His mom screams for help. Lula immediately jumps in and saves him, proving she's already a better hero than Glenn will ever be. But while everyone fusses over the boy, Lula suddenly goes limp and slides back into the water. Glenn finally remembers that Lula can't switch between her lungs and gills. He takes a deep breath and dives in, scaring Safe and half to death. She yells at the merman to take her closer. Meanwhile, Glenn catches up to Lula underwater. He kisses her to give her air. Lula starts breathing, but Glenn immediately starts drowning. Just as Lula is about to panic, Sane's tail appears in the water. She grabs both of them and hauls them back. When she sees Glenn clinging to Lula, she instantly yanks them apart and scolds him for being reckless. She also tells him to consider her feelings before doing anything stupid. Later, Glenn and San watch Lula perform at the mermaid concert. Afterward, she swims over and they ask about her health. She gets shy, remembering Glenn's terrible attempt at being useful. Safin scolds Glenn again, and he actually apologizes. Lula thanks him. Instead, Glenn smiles at her. This makes Lula so embarrassed that she swims away. Safe and still completely done with Glenn, tells him she wants him to get along because she considers Lula her little sister. Back at their clinic, Glenn and Safin treat a slime lady and talk about how they will help her keep her shape. She leaves while being carried out in a bathtub. Meanwhile, Glenn and Safin finally get a break. So Safin removes the sign that says they're available for treatment just when they think they'll have some peace. A knock on the door ruins everything. When they open it, they are shocked to see the council representative of Lindorm City, Lady Scotty Dragon, fell off bandits who thought they could mess with her. But instead of running those idiots, Glenn asks what Scotty wants. She replies, but he hears absolutely nothing. Before his brain cell can process what's happening, another woman barges in and translates. Turns out she's Kanai, Scotty's bodyguard, and she's here to yell at them for not listening properly. Sane whispers to Glenn that Kanai is crazy, devoted to her master, but before she can finish, Kanai shuts her up. She then explains that she lost her arm fighting out the fight, and now she needs Glenn to find her missing arm and fix her up. Glenn asks why they came to him. Kanai says Dr. Kathy referred them, which should have been Glenn's first red flag. He then asks what kind of monster she is, but before Kanai can answer, Scotty explains that Kanai was originally human but got stitched together using parts from dead people. Before leaving, Scotty orders Glenn to treat Kanai, but Kai instantly refuses, saying she can find her own arm and reattach it herself. She dips, leaving Glenn standing there like a fool. Safin and Glenn start talking about how aggressive Kai is, but Glenn, with all the confidence of someone who has never been useful, claims that the doctor who experimented on her just had bad technique. Then he decides to go looking for Kanai's missing arm, leaving Safin and the fairies in charge of the clinic. Meanwhile, Kanai spots one of the bandits who attacked her and chases him into an alley. But before she realizes what's happening, someone ambushes her and she ends up on the ground back in the city. Glenn starts looking for Kanai's arm, but then realizes he never asked where she even fought the bandits. Suddenly, he hears a scream and finds Taya, who was just shopping for vegetables. When she Kanai's leg, Glenn picks it up and assures her that this is not a crime scene. Meanwhile, Kanai, now dragging herself across the ground, realizes in both her arm and leg like a complete amateur. She suddenly feels a weird sensation. Her thigh is shaking, turns out. Glenn is holding her leg like a total creep. Tilia watches him work and says she's falling for him, but then she immediately adds that he looks like a perv with the way he's fondling the zombie leg. Glenn realizes he's been caught being weird and begs her not to tell Safin or he's doomed. Kanai, still on the ground, figures out that Glenn is the one touching her leg and she starts wondering when her curse will finally give her a break because she can hear the voices of all the dead people who make up her body. While Glenn holds Kanai's leg, Lula appears and tells him there's a rumor going around that he's collecting body parts for some creepy experiment. Glenn, looking guilty as hell, quickly explains that he's just trying to help his patient. Lula says she knows that and then casually pulls out Kanai's missing arm. Glenn is shocked, thanks her, and cleans the arm without realizing Kanai can feel everything he's doing. He tells Lula he needs to find Kanai next, and she tells him to just ask her arm and leg where she went that evening. Glenn finally finds Kanai and starts stitching her back together. While talking to her, Kanai starts calming down. After fixing her arm, Glenn moves onto her leg, making her make some very interesting noises. Meanwhile, Safin gets a visitor, her drinking buddy. Before leaving, the visitor gives on a gift and casually drops a bomb, saying she's worried Glenn might be out there cheating, saying absolutely not in the mood, kicks the big spider lady out, and starts overthinking. Back at the clinic, Glenn finishes treating Kanai, who is now deeply embarrassed. She thanks him and leaves in a hurry. Glenn, meanwhile, returns home, feeds the fairies, and sees Safin, but then he notices something shocking. Her stomach is swollen. Safin, completely unbothered, tells him she's now pregnant. Seeing that she loves no one else, she must have drugged him, loved him, and made him a baby daddy. Just as Glenn's frail little heart is about to explode out of his weak ribcage, he moves closer only for her to reveal it's just a prank. She has an egg, someone found and brought over before anyone can process what's happening. The bandits, thinking they're in some attack on Titan's side quest, storm a clinic. Like brainless Titan, Safin, now in full protective wife mode, wipes the floor with one of them without breaking a sweat. Meanwhile, Glenn, the useless sack of bones that he is, realizes this night isn't ending without some over-the-top shonen fight scenes. Safin quickly figures out that the bandits think they're working with Kanai. Speaking of Kanai, she's already taken down one of these bottom-tier villains and explains the situation. Turns out these bandits are involved in a harpy egg and animal trafficking ring. Glenn realizes the egg there belongs to a harpy and the bandits want it back. Just when things couldn't get dumber, Lady Scotty shows up in a boat pulled by Lula, who has apparently been downgraded from pop idol to full-time water taxi. Glenn immediately accuses Scotty of exploiting Lula's poverty. Scotty shuts him down instantly, reminding him that he's about as relevant as filler episodes. Lula defends Scotty, saying she's doing this by choice. With everyone gathered, they charge toward the bandit hideout, fully expecting this to turn into a One Piece style arc finale. The patrol team kicks down the front doors like they're storming the Grand Line, ready to rescue the kidnapped Harpy girls. Lady Scotty apologizes for dragging them into this mess, but before the emotional moment can settle, the bandits ambush them with arrows. Fortunately, our heroes dodge, like they've been secretly training in the Survey Corp. Kanai tanks a few arrows like they're minor inconveniences. Meanwhile, Talia and her team of overpowered centaur enter the battlefield, trampling bandits like they bugs. They tell Glenn and his useless self to keep moving toward the hostages. One of the dumbest bandit rants about how humans and monsters can never live together. But Talia, not in the mood for his nonsense, knocks some sense into him with a well-placed kick. As their boat arrives at the hideout, Kanai orders Lula to get to safety. Right when things start looking good, the bandit leader appears looking like a rejected sword art online villain. He and Kanai exchange insults with him, justifying his messed-up trafficking business as necessary for survival. Kanai, unimpressed, calls him an ugly bottom-feeding dog and challenges him to a duel. The fight isn't over yet. The bandits try to rally, but Safin, Talia, and Scotty form an OP trio and crush them instantly. Unfortunately, Safin gets poisoned and passes out. As she's fading, she starts mumbling some deep confession, only for Glenn to reveal he already knew. This somehow turns into Sane getting weirdly intimate because apparently it's mating season and she's picked the weakest male in the entire world. She pulls Glenn onto the bed and locks hands with him like she's about to introduce him to a whole new world. Look at those watermelons, round and perfectly placed, ready to suffocate this poor fool. Just when things are about to get spicy, the poison kicks in at the worst possible moment, saving Glenn from losing his virgin status. A few weeks later, Glenn and Safin, the only reason he's part 2 still alive, travel with Tadasalia and her crew to check on the harpies. Glenn worries about Illy, the harpy girl who gave birth. She can't fly after being kidnapped, and somehow Glenn thinks he can fix that. Before his PE brain can process anything, a landslide slams into the carriage, one of Talia's centaur. Lorna takes a hit, proving she's 10 times stronger than the goat in a lab coat. Glenn scrambles to check on Lorna, diagnosing her with a fractured leg. She tells him she's fine, but this soggy loaf of bread insists she needs treatment. The Harpies AR and fly Lorna to a village where Glenn, in full doctor mode, confirms that her injury is actually just a sprain. Lorna, proving she has more grit in one hoof than Glenn has in his entire noodle body, tries to stand and immediately regrets it. Later, the Harpies line up for checkups, all thanking Glenn for saving them, as if he wasn't already feeling like some kind of hero. He asks about Illy. Turns out she wants nothing to do with him. Probably the smartest decision she's ever made. Glenn eventually finds Kay alone by the river. Looking lost, she explains she got separated from Telia. Glenn, trying to act like some wise old sage, asks about her relationship with Lorna. Kay tells him how they were orphans who grew into strong battle-hardened warriors. Right when things start getting serious, Talia shows up to drag Kay back like a scolding mother. During dinner, Talia vents about Kay's clumsiness, which has gotten worse since they arrived. Safin, always enjoying a bit of gossip, asks Talia why they're negotiating with the Harpy Elder. Talia reveals her family wants to use the Harpies for business, but Kay's blunders are ruining everything. Desperate, she asks Glenn to examine Kay and even offered him top-tier booze. Of course, San agrees before the goat can even process it. As Glenn stresses over how to help, San casually slices apples and suggests tying up Lorna to help Kay focus. Glenn, with all the wisdom of a trash-tier harem protagonist, takes the idea literally. He blindfolds and restrains Lorna, and instead of protesting, this half-centaur actually enjoys it. The next day, Kay was fin-free from her bandages, and the clown doctor, Talia, and Safin set out to check on Illy. Instead of doing something normal like checking her pulse, this fool, Glenn, tickles her underarm like a creep. IL's reaction is a mix of get off me, and is this how you got your medical degree? Safin pulls the farm animal back, warning him to stop acting like he's about to plot his patient. Meanwhile, Talia is hyping this fool up, telling him to go harder. Illy, however, isn't about to let this goat have his way. She refuses to believe her feathers falling out is normal and sends a sharp claw kick straight at Glenn's dumb face, calling him a quack before she can connect. Talia steps in and reminds Illy who the real boss is. Illy storms off, flying away dramatically, leaving Talia to clean up the mess. Talia tracks Illy down and finally gets her to talk. Turns out, Illy is Talia's biggest fan and dreams of fighting in the arena just like her. Talia, feeling flattered, explains that her battles are more about grace and strategy than brute force. To prove a point, she picks up a stick and challenges Illy to a spar. If Illy wants to talk big, she better back it up. Later, Talia returns to the treatment room, telling Glenn about her glorious fight for his honor Safin, never missing a chance to roast. Someone agrees and suggests she should have just shoved the stick straight through IL's beak. Meanwhile, Glenn is worried Illy might get kidnapped again as she keeps running away. Talia hands him one of IL's feathers that fell during their spar, and he notices something weird about it. The next day, they gather feathers of the same color, and Talia hopes Illy finds a place where she belongs. Suddenly, Safin slithers in, clearly jealous, carrying a random pile of feathers like she's about to open a black market pillow shop. She's definitely not thrilled about Glenn spending so much time with Talia, who is very ready to prepare him. Just as things are finally calming down, a harpy rushes in with news. Illy is missing. The dumb bird flew off and now can't even fly anymore. Stuck in the woods like an idiot, Glenn, the ever-trying cow, decides to search for her. Instead of letting nature teach her a lesson, Safinus, using her snake eyes, spots Illy first. Illy tells them to leave her alone and go love themselves. But Glenn, for once in his life, does something useful and tells her that her feathers are changing, not because she's sick, but because she's growing her adult feathers and not just any feathers. These are special, phoenix-like feathers that will make every other bird jealous. Illy, now hyped, spreads her feathers, excited about the idea of flying again. A few days later, she shows Glenn her new feathers, which look like someone threw random ice cream flavors into a blender. Glenn, the useless goat, asks why she didn't want him to examine her before Illy, blushing, admits she couldn't look him in the eye after he saw her lay an egg. With that, she flies off, leaving a single feather behind. Glenn catches it, realizing it's strangely hot. Maybe a sign of the phoenix spirit burning inside her. Glenn is forced to teach the harpies how to shower because they smell worse than an otaku convention. After 3 days with no ventilation, one harpy acting like she just discovered physical contact completely malfunctions. When the virgin brushes her feathers, that sets off a chain reaction. And now all the harpies are fighting over who gets to feel Glenn's useless touch. Next later, Illy bursts into Glenn's clinic covered in some mysterious sticky substance. It looks like she flew through the woods and straight into a spider's web. Glenn, using his 2 functioning brain cells, figures out it's from an arican, a half-man, half-spider creature. He tells Illy to take a hot bath, but before she can rope him into joining, Safin shuts that nonsense down faster than Lightning McQueen. More harpies show up, covered in the same webby mess, and Glenn, the medically trained idiot, finally realizes they need to deal with the source of the problem. He and Safin follow the silk trails into the forest like 2 clueless kids in a fairy tale, only to walk straight into a trap. Out comes Arania. A spider woman who knows Safin from way back. Turns out she's here hunting the harpy with phoenix feathers. Glenn introduces her to Illy, but the moment Arania sees those fancy feathers, she loses her mind and starts chasing Illy like a starving man after a buffet. Talia, already annoyed from training nearby, watches the whole mess unfold and is seconds away from having a meltdown. She insists that Glenn, who has been largely unhelpful, take action before the spider woman harms Illy. In public view, Safin, being the worst person to de-escalate the situation, starts quoting Uncle Ben about great power and responsibility. But Tile isn't in the mood for life lessons. The 2 start arguing. Glenn tries and fails to play peacemaker and Safan storms off that night. Glenn finally does something right and takes Sven to a hot spring to help her relax. The next day, the peaceful village life is interrupted by rumbling noises and the elder sends his best men to investigate. Meanwhile, Safin is chilling in the bath with the horse girls, leaving Glenn to deal with the chaos alone. Arania, still obsessed with the phoenix feathers, shows up at Glenn's clinic pretending to be sick, just to get his attention. She flirts with him, acting like she finally understands why Safin wants to cuddle him so badly. She even asks Glenn to take a walk with her. Like the fool he is, he agrees. Of course it's a trap. Glenn steps into one of her webs and Arania, now completely unhinged, reveals her true intentions. She wants to cuddle him right then and there and make her 8 legs shake. Just as she's about to start, Talia crashes in like a jealous girlfriend. She and Arania immediately get into a screaming match over who, the superior multi-legged woman deserving of Glenn's useless affection. Arania calls Talia a hypocrite, saying she acts all noble while secretly being just as thirsty as everyone else. Talia, triggered beyond belief, refuses to be compared to a creepy spider and goes full attack mode. Before things get completely out of control, Safin arrives and saves Glenn from getting turned into spider food. She makes it clear that Glenn doesn't have time for love, though it's obvious her own words sting. Later that night, Glenn and Safin share a drink. Safin, drunk and emotional, finally admits her feelings. She confesses she's scared someone will steal Glenn away, especially with Talia being so dead. Set on marrying him, the village turns into a madhouse as people panic, running around like headless chickens. Talia tries to keep them calm, while barking orders to prevent a giant-sized disaster. She tells everyone to pack up and move their stuff far from the mountain before the oversized problem arrives. The ones who can fly take off with their belongings, leaving the slowpokes to scramble. Glenn, the useless goat, barely finishes treating his last patient. When Safin tells him to stop being dumb and start packing before they get left behind, Glenn, the master of bad timing, stares out the window and sees Arania actually helping, which surprises him because he thought she only lived to make his life worse. Safin tells him Arania is really good at stuff, but before he can process that information, the ground starts shaking. Glenn starts looking for Talia, realizing she's been missing for a while. As she walks forward, fantasizing about whatever nonsense is in her head, she suddenly sees Safian and gets distracted by her outfit. Safian casually explains that she asked Arania to make it for her because it's freezing. Talia, of course, is too focused on her dramatic hero moment to care Glenn. The human-shaped burden suddenly appears out of nowhere. Talia is amused but not surprised, because of course he would show up uninvited. Safan and Talia start arguing over whether they should stay and fight or follow the villagers. Both too stubborn to back down, Glenn interrupts their bickering, probably the first useful thing he's done all day, and tells them he has a plan. They all agree to follow it. They move forward and finally see the giant up close. Glenn, proving once again that he has the survival instincts of a potato, walks right up to the massive creature to ask why she came down the mountain. The girls yell at him to stop being a goat, but before he can process the warning, the giant sneezes. The sheer force of it sends a wave of sticky mucus flooding through the village, sweeping Glenn off his hooves and sending him flying like a rejected action figure. It turns out the giant has a cold before anyone panics. The giant, whose name is Diome, explains that she came looking for a doctor. Glenn, covered in snot and regretting all his life choices, confirms she has a fever and asks when she started feeling sick. She tells him everything and he promises to make her some medicine. Like the clown he is, Glenn immediately trips and falls straight onto the giant's divine melons. He thanks her for saving him, but instead of getting out like a normal person, he starts squeezing, realizing they're just as soft as the humans. After she finally gets her medicine, the other girls start to warm up to Diome. Glenn, shocked that the scary giant is actually nice, starts to wonder if all those terrifying stories were just exaggerated nonsense. She needs a warm cloth to help her recover, and luckily Safin knows someone who can make it. They run to Ernia, who practically jumps for joy, because designing giant-sized clothes has always been her dream. The villagers help out, and by the end of the day, Diome is wrapped up in a cozy new outfit. She thanks them all, and just like that, disaster is avoided. Safin tells Glenn to stop standing around and get back to work because the clinic isn't going to run itself. He follows her, realizing she's right. Later, Glenn takes Talia out for dinner, letting her eat as much as she wants after everything she's been through. They chat about recent events, but Safin, who has clearly been spying the entire time, suddenly jumps in with her opinion. She admits she admires Talia's courage, but quickly reminds her that she's not about to let her steal Glenn away. Talia, not want to back down from a challenge, fires back and the two start arguing like children. Glenn, being the dumb cow, he just thinks they're getting along. They both immediately tell him he's wrong, but end up laughing anyway. The next day, Glenn gets invited to the Merry Water ceremony. Sapin notices an empty seat and realizes one of the guests is missing. Before she can think too much about it, the ceremony begins. Everything seems fine until out of nowhere, one of the ladies in the ceremony suddenly collapses. Glenn, the walking disaster, starts talking to Sane about what just happened. He acts like he was some kind of hero, even though he probably tripped over his own hooves a few times before getting there. They talk about her personal doctor, and for some reason Scotty is treated like some kind of legend in the city. Glenn, being the clueless cow he is, just nods along, probably still trying to process basic information. They finally head to see Lady Tully. She looks at Glenn and immediately points out that he has aged terribly. Glenn, in typical fashion, takes this as a friendly conversation instead of an insult to his face. They catch up since it's been a long time, but things take a serious turn when she tells him she's in a critical condition, despite being on the verge of collapsing. She still refuses to give details about what's wrong. She doesn't know the exact cause, but says that with some medicine and proper food, she can at least walk around without looking like she's about to drop dead. She also mentions that Skade doesn't even want to get better, and then decides that she's talked enough, basically kicking them out. On their way out, they see that the doctor is drowning in work, running from one patient to another, like she's the only one keeping the palace from falling apart. Glenn, ever the stubborn goat, refuses to accept that there's nothing they can do. He immediately starts SK, steaming convinced that he can fix everything, even if it means going against what his teacher told him. He decides to head straight to SK's room, and this is where Safin starts to panic. Her brain instantly goes into overdrive because Glenn, the useless bull, will be alone in another woman's room. Worse, he has to examine her while she's in less clothing. Safin tries to convince herself that it's just medical examination and that Glenn has done this 1,000,000 times before. But she can't shake the feeling that something will go wrong. Because, well, it's Glenn. He has the ability to turn even the most normal situation into a complete disaster. As they prepare for the evening, she keeps giving him side eyes, knowing full well that he's going to mess up. Somehow. Later that night, they reach SK's room. Glenn is the only one allowed to enter, which Safin immediately protests. She insists that she has to go in with him. Despite her protests, Glenn goes in alone, while Safin and Kay stick their ears to the door like a pair of nosy children. Inside, Glenn sees Lady Scotty, and just when he thinks she's too weak to talk, she opens her mouth and starts feeling bad for troubling Kanai. She tells Glenn that he can't cure her, which somehow shocks him. Apparently, the goat still thinks he's a miracle worker. Then she casually opens her chest, revealing a massive tumor on her ridiculous-sized melons. Glenn, instead of acting professionally, asks if he can touch it. Of course, he starts rubbing it like a complete buffoon. While she explains how the tumor is spreading through her veins, he continues checking different parts of her body, trying to figure out if he can actually do something or if he's just wasting time. Then he checks her tail and notices ISS. It's a different color. As he tells her to calm down, she suddenly starts making noises that make the whole situation 10 times worse.